We live in a world that is without question broken. We see shades of beauty, we see shadows of beauty everywhere we look, but somehow deep in the human heart, we know and we realize that this is not right. There is something wrong with our world. Why is there so much beauty, and yet why is there so much corruption and decay? We know these things intuitively. Indeed, they are self evident. If you just think of the example, if you've ever been with a friend and had a really good afternoon or time together, doing the things that you love. Have you ever noticed that during that time, time seems to fly? The old adage of time flies when you're having fun. Doesn't that seem like that's natural to the human experience? And yet, if you're going through pain, if you're going through suffering, every tick of the clock seems like an eternity. That tells us a lot about our reality and what we were created to experience. What if the Bible's right and that experience is a foreshadowing not only of what heaven will be like, but who God is? This morning, we're going to look at a text in John chapter 5 where there was an individual who had suffered for 38 years. Jesus steps into his situation and heals this man and sets him free from his disease. It's a wonderful account of God's heart for humanity, and there is so much to learn together. Join me as we go and look deeper in John's gospel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always keeping it fresh here at the People Scholar. I'd like to welcome you to the People Scholar Bible Study YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Jay Williams, and if you've been with us, we've been working our way through John's Gospel. This morning, we're going to be looking at John chapter 5, specifically verses 1 through 17. So if you have your Bible, feel free to turn there as we continue to dig deeper into John's Gospel. Turning there now, we read in verse 1, "After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be healed?' The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me.' Jesus said to him, 'Get up, take up your bed, and walk.' And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, 'It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed.' But he answered them, 'The man who healed me, that man said to me, Take up your bed and walk.' They asked him, 'Who is the man who said to you, Take up your bed and walk?' Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, 'See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you.' The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, 'My Father is working until now, and I am working.'" Now, right away in our text, we see that Jesus goes to Jerusalem during one of the feasts. Now, John doesn't tell us what feast actually is taking place there. We know earlier on in chapter 2, we saw Jesus turn water into wine in Cana, and that he left there and went to Jerusalem during the Passover. But here, John sort of leaves us out in the dark. He just says there's a feast of the Jews taking place in Jerusalem. So, this would have been a time where people would have come from all over the country. Whatever celebration was going on, it was a joyous time. It was a festival time, something akin to Thanksgiving or Christmas in a modern day context. So the city would have been very busy. Now, John transitions to a part of the city that likely most people that were present there didn't think much about during the time of the feast. In fact, as the festivities were going on, there was a large gathering of individuals who had disabilities that would gather near these 2 pools. We know from the other gospel writers that in the past, whether this was true or whether it was some sort of superstition, that an angel had come down and touched the waters, and that whoever reached out and touched the waters first was healed. So whether that was reality, whether that was a demonic thing that took place, or whether it was just superstition, these individuals gathered there with hope that they possibly might be healed of their disability. Now, we're told that this section of the city was a large area. There were 5 roofed colonnades there. So there was a large number of people there. And that it was located by the sheep gate. Now, the sheep gate wasn't the gate that you wanted to be near if you were in the city. That was the gate where animals were brought in for the sacrifices that would take place at the temple. So it was located very close to the temple. But this area was a smelly area. It was an area of animal traffic. And it was an area where, by some means of a miracle, these individuals went hoping that they might be healed. Some historians note that this area, this pool, Bethesda, may have been fed by underground springs due to mineral deposits that still are present at that site. I myself have been to this site in Jerusalem and have seen the ruins of this area. So it is possible there was some sort of mineral properties that had healing powers. We do not know. We just know that these individuals went there hoping to be healed, and that was the desire of their heart. Now, specifically, John takes us to one man. That is, out of all the people that are present in Jerusalem, out of all the individuals who are present at this pool, John hones in and Jesus hones in on one single person, a man who had been paralyzed for 38 years. That is his whole life. Laying by this pool, obviously someone had taken him there. He is present by the pool, yet he is unable himself to get down to the waters. So somebody had probably dropped him off, went about their business at the feast, and he is sitting there waiting for an opportunity to touch the waters after 38 years. So this is an individual who had great faith. This is an individual who, in spite of year after year after year of suffering the same disability, held on to a hope that by some means his body might be restored and made whole, that he might have a normal functioning body like so many of us that we may take for granted. He's laying by the pool, and Jesus, the Son of God, knowing this man, knowing him all throughout time and space, his time on earth, approaches him. And one of the most incredible and emotionally charged miracles takes place. Sometimes in this life, we can feel invisible. We can feel like God does not see us, that he doesn't understand our sufferings, that he doesn't know our journey. But if we're honest with each other, that's true of every one of us, that each one of us has struggles in this life, experiences hardships. It doesn't matter what that hardship is. We all come to a place where maybe we experience the dark night of the soul and we feel alone and we're crying out inside saying, God, if you're there, I need you. I can't think of many passages in the Bible that are as clear as this passage that God knows each one of us and he sees us in those moments of desperation. Very few of us have experienced the kind of desperation that this individual faced. And yet we see God reaching out from heaven down to earth, making a special appointment to be with this man. It's fascinating what takes place. When we look at verse 6, it says that when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me." Let's just think about that for a second. If we were to just pause and put ourselves in the place of this individual, lying crippled by this pool, staring out at it, not being able to move, and perhaps being able to sort of hobble and roll in that direction, trying time and time again to get to the pool. And as this person's going, others are stepping over him, other individuals with disabilities. This is an ugly sight. This is a horrible picture of the suffering of humanity in a physical perspective. And yet, can't many of us relate to this on an emotional level, or perhaps just in a spiritual level in our souls, that something is wrong in this life, and yet we're longing for something we know to be true that's just beyond our reach? We can kind of relate to what's happening here. And so Jesus approaches the man knowing what he's going to do, and he looks at him and he says, Do you want to be healed? Do you need some help here? Now, it's impossible to reenact exactly how this conversation took place, but we can expect that it was possible, very possible, that this man could have responded cynically. That is, as he looked up at Jesus and saw who it was that was talking to him, and as Jesus looked down at him and said, "Hey, do you want to be healed?" This man had been paralyzed for 38 years, and he had been to this pool many times, and he had been trampled over trying to get to this pool. He could have looked at Jesus and said, "Yeah, what do you know about it, buddy?" He could have responded with anger and frustration. And yet, what we see here is the opposite spirit. He looks up at Jesus and he gives him an honest answer. He still has that hope that he can be healed. And we can infer that from how he responds to Jesus with respect and with honesty. I think that says a lot about the character of this individual and why God went to him. This was an honest person suffering that longed to be healed and was probably the weakest person present during this very important time when all these other individuals would gather there with the hope of being healed. Now, fascinating, but when Jesus heals this man, he doesn't draw any fanfare to himself. That is, Jesus never grandstands when he does a miracle. He reaches down to this man and tells him, "If you want to be healed, all right, pick up your bed and walk." And John tells us immediately that man becomes whole, grabs his bed, and walks out of that area called Bethesda, a whole man. Amazing miracle. This miracle is probably one of the most important miracles in all of the New Testament. Now, fascinating, but as soon as God does something good, as soon as God steps in with compassion and love, the devil is there to somehow twist that into something that is wrong. Now, we see that in verses 9 and following. We're told right away that after the miracle took place, that it was the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath originally was created by God for human flourishing. That is, God in Genesis chapter 1 creates the heavens and the earth in 6 days. On the seventh day, we're told that he rested from all of his work. Now, that wasn't because God needed rest. He is omnipotent, that is, he is all powerful. He never exhausts his power, but he did that as an example for humanity. That is, we were created in such a way that our bodies need rest, we need to recharge. The Sabbath rest was designed so that we would take one day in seven to rest our bodies and to worship. Now, implicitly, the law was implying that we would merely rest from our jobs, that is, our vocations, that it would be a time where we stepped away from trying to make money and we tended to our rest and to worship and to being with family and friends. And it didn't extend beyond that. However, during the intertestamental period, that is between the Old Testament and the New Testament, we discussed earlier about how the groups of the Pharisees and the scribes had come to be and that they sought to be very religious. They sought to honor God in everything that they did so that they would earn God's favor and that the silence from heaven would be broken and that God would indeed speak again. Good motivations. However, by the corrupt nature of humanity, these individuals began creating extra biblical laws. And during that time, there was a development of rabbinical law wherein there was 39 different rules that were to be followed during the Sabbath. And one of them was that you couldn't travel from one place to another carrying or doing any work. We can see how far that goes all of a sudden. Now the Pharisees are policing everybody to make sure that they follow their man-made laws, laws that had nothing to do with God's design for the Sabbath. The Sabbath originally was made for our good. We are the chief creation in creation. The Sabbath was made for us. We weren't made for the Sabbath, but the Pharisees had turned it into a policing situation. They had created their own policies and were monitoring everybody's actions so that even if a person was walking with a mat on the Sabbath, they were somehow offending God. Strict legalism. Now, the Pharisees didn't have to worry about this individual who had been paralyzed for 38 years offending this violation. And yet, it had to feel pretty good if you were the man healed to be able to walk through Jerusalem during the feast carrying your mat, probably the only person who was doing so, and then to be accosted by the Pharisees who said, "Hey, you're not allowed to carry your mat on the Sabbath." And that man looking at them and thinking, "Oh, yeah, that's what I'm doing right now." So they approach him and they say, what are you doing? Why are you walking with your mat during the Sabbath? You know you're not supposed to do that. And the man looking at them says, yeah, that might be so, but the man who just healed me told me that I could do that. And obviously, that man was logical and he was thinking, that person has real power. These people have no real power in God. So I'm going to listen to the guy that just healed me instantly over these clowns that are chasing me around, getting after me just because I'm walking when I've been paralyzed for 38 years. Now, over the next couple sessions together, we're going to work through the depth of what's happening here. But Jesus is honoring the Sabbath in its true form, and he's challenging the authorities. So this man is walking around. He's accosted by the Pharisees. They question him then, who was the person who healed you? The man didn't even know it was Jesus. That is, after he'd been healed, he got out of there so fast that he didn't even take time to have a conversation, and Jesus just disappears into the shadows. Well, Jesus comes to him again. We read in verse 14. It says, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. In other words, Jesus is cheerfully greeting this man, saying, your long held wish has been fulfilled. You are healed. But then he turns it around in a different direction and says, okay, you are healed, but now go and honor God with this body that has been given to you. He says, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. In other words, Jesus is saying, a life lived sinfully, a life lived in rebellion against God is worse off than an individual whose physical body is disabled. That is, it's a life where the soul is disabled and it leads to death. So Jesus gives him the desire of his heart, and then he tells him, go and sin no more, go honor God with this gift that has been given to you. And we're told that the man went away and told the Jews. So he went and reported back because they probably had threatened him and said that it was Jesus who had healed him. And we're told then by John that they began to persecute Jesus and that this is why they were persecuting him, because he was healing on the Sabbath. Now, there is so much going on here that we could talk about. We will go into greater detail next time together. But I just want to end on one note. When we think about Jesus earlier in John's gospel going to the temple and flipping over tables, at anger and rage burning through his physical body as he looked around the temple and saw that the temple itself had been turned into a market instead of a place of worship, the temple has far less value than an individual. And so, what's going on here on a deeper level is that the leaders of the temple had lost sight of the heart of God. They had lost sight of compassion, the heart of David from the Old Testament. And they were now becoming legalized, policing individuals.